I had hoped that when the United States Congress, in historic debate, took its resolute action, Saddam would realize he could not prevail and would move out of Kuwait in accord with the United Nations resolutions. He did not do that. Instead, he remained intransigent, certain that time was on his side. Saddam was warned over and over again to comply with the will of the United Nations, leave Kuwait or be driven out. Saddam has arrogantly rejected all warnings. Instead, he tried to make this a dispute between Iraq and the United States of America. Well, he failed. Tonight, 28 nations, countries from 5 continents, Europe and Asia, Africa and the Arab League, have forces in the Gulf area standing shoulder to shoulder against Saddam Hussein. These countries had hoped the use of force could be avoided. Regrettably, we now believe that only force will make him leave. Prior to ordering our forces into battle, I instructed our military commanders to take every necessary step to prevail as quickly as possible and with the greatest degree of protection possible for American and Allied servicemen and women. I've told the American people before that this will not be another Vietnam. And I repeat this here tonight. Our troops will have the best possible support in the entire world, and they will not be asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back. I'm hopeful that this fighting will not go on for long, and that casualties will be held to an absolute minimum. This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. We have no argument with the people of Iraq. Indeed, for the innocents caught in this conflict, I pray for their safety. Our goal is not the conquest of Iraq. It is the liberation of Kuwait. It is my hope that somehow the Iraqi people can, even now, convince their dictator that he must lay down his arms, leave Kuwait, and let Iraq itself rejoin the family of peace-loving nations. Thomas Paine wrote many years ago, "These are the times that try men's souls." Those well-known words are so very true today. But even as planes of the multinational forces attack Iraq, I prefer to think of peace, not war. I am convinced not only that we will prevail, but that out of the horror of combat will come the recognition that no nation can stand against a world united. No nation will be permitted to brutally assault its neighbor. No president can easily commit our sons and daughters to war. They are the nation's finest. Ours is an all-volunteer force, magnificently trained, highly motivated. The troops know why they're there, and listen to what they say, for they've said it better than any president or prime minister ever could. Listen to Hollywood Huddleston, Marine Lance Corporal. He says, "Let's free these people so we can go home and be free again." And he's right. The terrible crimes and tortures committed by Saddam's henchmen against the innocent people of Kuwait are an affront to mankind and a challenge to the freedom of all. Listen to one of our great officers out there. Marine Lieutenant General Walter Boomer, he said, there are things worth fighting for. A world in which brutality and lawlessness are allowed to go unchecked isn't the kind of world we're going to want to live in. Listen to Master Sergeant J.P. Kendall of the 82nd Airborne. We're here for more than just the price of a gallon of gas. What we're doing is going to chart the future of the world for the next 100 years. It's better to deal with this guy now than 5 years from now. And finally, we should all sit up and listen to Jackie Jones, an Army lieutenant, when she says, if we let him get away with this, who knows what's going to be next? I've called upon Hollywood and Walter and J.P. and Jackie and all their courageous comrades in arms to do what must be done. Tonight, America and the world are deeply grateful to them and to their families. And let me say to everyone listening or watching tonight, when the troops we've sent in finish their work, I'm determined to bring them home as soon as possible. Tonight, as our forces fight, they and their families are in our prayers. May God bless each and every one of them and the coalition forces at our side in the Gulf, and may He continue to bless our nation, the United States of America.
President Bush, live from the Oval Office in a 12-minute address to the nation and the world, saying at the outset his minimal demands. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait and Iraq will comply with all relevant UN resolutions. Let's go now to Charles Jaco, who has word on airplanes in Saudi Arabia. Charles.
Yes, David. One high-ranking Saudi official has told us that he has been in touch with the highest levels in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. According to this information, he claims that all the planes from this first raid, Saudi and U.S. planes, have returned safely with no loss of planes and no loss of pilots. That's according to a high-ranking Saudi official here with contacts in Riyadh. King Fahd, the King of Saudi Arabia, is said to be meeting right now in Riyadh with members of his court and members of his government. I asked one Air Force officer here about the raid, how it went. Information was very hard to come by, but he would only tell me that the raid was, quote, more successful than we imagined, close quote. We can only imagine what that means. So the preliminary, and I must say these are preliminary indications we're getting here from a high-ranking Saudi official and an Air Force officer, is that the first wave of the raid on Iraq at least was successful, and that at least all the Saudi and United States planes have returned without any loss. David?
Saudi Arabia, thank you very much. The force may indeed be larger than we had been led to believe, and with word on that is our correspondent who covers world affairs for us, Ralph Begleiter. I'm sorry for that lapse. Ralph, what have you for us?
David, according to Saudi officials, the number of Saudi planes in the air tonight was 150, joining the American fighters. And according to the Saudis, the air attacks were much more extensive than merely Baghdad. We, of course, had our reporting only from Baghdad because of the limitations of coverage in Iraq. But according to these Saudi sources, the attacks were countrywide throughout Iraq. Involved in the mission tonight, along with British and American forces. The Saudi sources also say that Saudi Ambassador Prince Bandar was here at the State Department this morning at 8 o'clock for a meeting with Secretary of State Baker, a very brief meeting, about 10 minutes long, during which Baker asked for the Saudi green light to go ahead with the attack today. Prince Bandar telephoned King Fahd from Baker's office itself, received the green light, gave it to Baker immediately. That was the prearranged signal that the United States and the Saudis had decided on in order to get the Saudi government on board for the attack. In fact, that was the language used by King Fahd. He said, "We are on board." In addition, we've learned that Israel was pre-notified of the attack as well through several channels. The Saudis here in the Soviets here in Washington say they were not informed through the embassy in Washington, but presume that direct channels between Washington and Moscow were utilized for pre-notification. David?
World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter, thank you very much, reporting live from the State Department. Everyone wants us to go back to Baghdad, and so do I, where Bernard Shaw, Peter Arnett, and John Holloman have been reporting this dramatic evening. Gentlemen.
This is Bernie. We have listened to the President's address, and as he indicated in speaking, or while speaking, hostilities were going on, and indeed, we could see far off in the distance lights flashing. We could hear the bombs, and we could see the tracer fire from the anti-aircraft batteries. As I listened to President Bush tonight, it seemed to me that he was telling Saddam Hussein, you are going to quit Kuwait. But I also heard Peter Arnett and John Holloman an implied threat to this man that the forces have gone against the nuclear plant that was a building. The forces have gone against the chemical arsenals. But I heard the president saying that we might not stop here. He did declare that this was not an invasion of Iraq. He wants to cripple this man's military capability. I should also tell you that we do not know where President Saddam Hussein is at this moment, nor do we know where other members of his government are located. I'm going to pass the microphone around because each of my colleagues has something to contribute. John Holloman.
Bernie, I think you're right about the President's message to President Saddam Hussein. It's a message of this is it. This is the beginning of what we're going to do. I'm sure the President would like very much if President Hussein would respond right away by, offering to pull out of Kuwait or something, but we'll have to wait and see what he's going to do later on. The last time we saw President Saddam Hussein was on television tonight in video that we know was at least a day old from a tour that he made of Kuwait. Excuse me. I'm now looking out the window of our bureau here, and I can tell you that off in the distance there continues to be the sounds of what appear to me to be bombs. During the President's message, there were flashes of light from a distance probably as much as 15 or 20 miles away, probably to the south of where we are. And at this moment, there are no signs of anti-aircraft fire in the downtown Baghdad area, but there continue to be these flashes of light off in the distance to the south. Peter Arnett, your reflections.
Yes, John, I couldn't help thinking as I heard the bombs, the distant bombs, punctuating President Bush's speech of his reference to Vietnam. This will not be another Vietnam. And I was thinking back to Vietnam, where I spent many years, to a similar raid in 1972, a B-52 strike on Hanoi. The interesting thing was that raid came at the end of the Vietnam War, near the end of the Vietnam War, and many say it helped end that war. This raid on Baghdad and elsewhere in this region tonight is at the beginning of this war, and maybe it certainly won't be a Vietnam. John?
Peter, while you were speaking, the sky lit up again with some more apparently chaff to fool Iraqi radar in the sky. There are bunches of groups of white lights and yellow lights that go through the sky and then blink out mysteriously, apparently designed to confuse the anti-aircraft guns. And at this point, the anti-aircraft guns are not firing. So if they're intended to confuse, they are not. The guns are not firing. Well, as I speak, off in the distance, I see some anti-aircraft fire is going up pretty far away from our location, and you might be able in the background to hear some of that out the window. Yeah, Bernie Shaw is back again, and then we want to talk to someone who's just come up from the shelters downstairs who will brief our loved ones about how things are there. Bernie.
Yes, I was just, Ingrid has been sitting here on the floor. I don't know how you managed to get past those guards and make that long hike up those 14 stories that I made about an hour ago. But what is the situation in the bomb shelter? And Ingrid, you know all of the members of the press corps.
It's not quite sunup yet in Baghdad. By the way, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, is reporting that 5 Iraqi Scud missiles have been fired on Saudi Arabia, and the French embassy in Riyadh confirms that at least 1 Scud missile was fired. Those are the first reports of effective or possibly effective retaliatory firing from Iraq outward. Well, we've just heard from the very interior of a bombed country, Iraq. Let's go now to the interior of the United States, the hometown of the late President Harry S. Whoops, we're switching our plans now to go to Charles Jaco in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, we've just been given a statement by General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of the U.S. Central Command and the head of Operation Desert Storm, to the troops. I'll read part of it very briefly. This morning at 0300 Saudi time, we launched Operation Desert Storm, an offensive campaign that will enforce the UN resolutions. And this is directed to the troops, all the troops, especially the U.S. troops. During my visits with you, I have seen in your eyes a fire of determination to get this job done quickly so we all may return to the shores of our great nation. My confidence in you is total. Our cause is just. Now you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. May God be with you. Signed, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Central Command. The indications we're getting so far are that the operation to this early date is working fairly well. David?
Well, tonight we know why they call him Stormin' Norman. Thank you for that. We've just been in the heartland of Iraq with our three fine correspondents there. Let's go to the heartland of America now.
Any further political analysis of the President's speech, we'll come back to it. This is clearly a briefing that the entire nation, in fact, much of the world, will hang on the Secretary of Defense.
Well, thank you very much, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you all heard the speech a short time ago by the President. And while there is not a great deal we can add now, we did want to be as forthcoming as we can with you. At 7 o'clock tonight, as you all know by now, Eastern Time, 3 o'clock Thursday morning in the Gulf, the Armed Forces of the United States began an operation at the direction of the President to force Saddam Hussein to withdraw his troops from Kuwait and to end his occupation of that country. At the direction of the President, I signed the execute order yesterday afternoon to undertake this operation, subject to certain conditions. It was to begin only after we'd met the terms of the resolution passed last Saturday by the Congress. Those conditions have been complied with and proper notice has been given as required. And the operation was not to take place if there had been any last-minute diplomatic breakthroughs. The operation underway tonight, taking place in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf, involves allied air forces of 4 nations: the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. As they undertake their missions, they do so after months of careful planning. At the direction of the President, great care has been taken to focus on military targets, to minimize U.S. casualties, and to do everything possible to avoid injury to civilians in Iraq and Kuwait. The targets being struck tonight are located throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Our focus is on the destruction of Saddam Hussein's offensive military capabilities, the very capabilities that he used to seize control of Kuwait and that make him a continuing threat to the nations of the Middle East. These are the same capabilities that now threaten American and allied forces in the Gulf. Our goal, the same one we have maintained throughout Operation Desert Shield, is to liberate Kuwait and enforce the resolutions of the UN Security Council. This portion of the campaign, directed against Saddam Hussein's offensive military force, is an enormously complex undertaking. It involves all of the services of the United States military and hundreds of U.S. and allied aircraft. It is an ongoing operation, and we must therefore limit the kind and the amount of information that we provide in these early stages. This obviously is different from what happened in Panama in December of 1989, where most of the operation was over by the morning of the first day. We understand your need for information about what will happen next, and we are well aware of our obligation to keep the American people informed. But you must also understand that we cannot talk about future operations without putting at risk the safety of those who will have to carry them out. I believe I can speak for all of us at the Pentagon tonight when I say that we had hoped to settle this matter peacefully. This has clearly been an agonizing decision for the President and the Congress of the United States. And we've reached the point of committing our forces to battle very reluctantly, only after the most careful consideration. But no one should doubt our ability and our resolve to carry out our mission and to achieve our objective. I have great confidence in the professionalism, the dedication, and the determination of the men and women of our armed forces. They are, without question, the finest young sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines this nation has ever sent in harm's way. I want to assure all Americans that we will do our very best to carry out the President's orders as quickly and efficiently as possible and at the lowest cost possible. We'd be happy to respond to a few questions.
General Powell, can you describe the Iraqi Air Force's resistance, if any, their losses so far, and to what extent do you think that you've already achieved air superiority there?
Well, the operation's only 2.5 hours old, so I'm not quite prepared to take on your second question. So far, there has been no air resistance.
Can you tell us if there's been any casualties so far?
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
What can you tell us about the Scud missiles that have been reportedly launched by Iraq?
There have been a number of reports of Scud missiles, but insofar as I am aware, they basically are false reports. General Powell, I want to say
this. Can you give us a rundown on the types of aircrafts and numbers that were involved in the raids?
I really can't at this time because it is an ongoing operation. Let me just say that it involved the Air Forces mentioned by Secretary Cheney and sorties in the hundreds.
Can you tell us were there cruise missiles involved with that?
I won't comment on specific weaponry. It's an ongoing operation.
What targets were we bombing near Baghdad, and have we bombed any facilities where we think Saddam Hussein might be?
We have not been targeting Mr. Saddam Hussein. The purpose of our bombing facilities in the area of Baghdad is essentially to go after the command and control system of the Iraqi armed forces, and we're looking at principally military targets, command and control installations, air defense sites that could put our planes at risk, but they are militarily oriented targets.
Have you targeted any Iraq response of any kind?
The response of the Iraqi forces at this point has been limited, I think would be the best way to characterize it. But again, let me emphasize, as General Powell did, we're in the very early stages of this operation. It is likely to run for a long period of time. I realize you've all got legitimate questions about it, but there simply are things we do not know yet because it is an ongoing operation, because pilots are just now returning, and there'll be a lot of work required to assess the success of the initial efforts, and there will be a lot of follow-up work required as well.
Could you tell us, please, whether or not there have been any indications whatsoever that the Iraqi troops, the 540,000 Iraqi troops in the Kuwaiti theater, have been cut off from their command and control headquarters in Baghdad?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that at this point, Wolf.
What about, Mr. Secretary, can I follow up, please? Sure. Can I follow up? The President said this was strictly an air operation for the time being. When does the U.S. decide to send in the ground forces?
It is strictly an air operation for the time being, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the point at which additional forces might be engaged.
Have your targets tonight with any Navy
planes? Laurent said on the McNeil Larry News Hour this evening that we are, quote, now prisoners of our own country, in our own country. Now that we've defended ourselves from naked aggression in the Middle East, how do we defend ourselves here at home from terrorist attacks?
I'm confident that we can deal with the terrorist threat.
Have our targets thus far included tanks and artillery?
I don't want to get into specific target sets yet. As the information comes in and builds over time, and we can give it to you historically, we will give it out, but I'm not prepared to go into specific target sets and what targets have been hit and have not, because it really is just too early to give you that kind of bomb damage assessment.
If Saddam Hussein says tomorrow, I give up, I'm sorry, I will withdraw from Kuwait, will you pause to have a pause in your air campaign, or will you continue with it until you knock out all the priority targets?
I will do whatever the President of the United States directs us to do through the Secretary of Defense.
Secretary Cheney, from a military perspective, what went into your thinking in deciding to launch the attack at this point this evening? What were the factors?
Well, I think there were several factors. Of course, the President made the basic decision to commit the force. It was affected by, among other things, the expiration of the United Nations deadline that had been set on November 30th when the Security Council voted for the use of any means necessary to get him out. I think it was affected in part as a result of consultation with our allies, but it also was based upon the advice of our senior military commanders. in terms of picking a time when conditions appeared to be most favorable for undertaking the operation. Let me emphasize, though, that the procedure we went through was to plan for execution of the operation at a point after the expiration of the United Nations deadline, but I had no authority to execute the plan until the President instructed me yesterday afternoon to do so, and it was at that point that we signed out the execute order with the qualifiers I mentioned in my opening statement.
Those favorable factors, can you tell us what some of those were?
I think I just leave it where it is.
Are you surprised that there was no response, or a very small response from the Iraqi forces at this point?
Again, I'm reluctant to characterize the response beyond what we've already said about it. We've not had an opportunity to debrief our pilots yet. Some of them are still flying missions, and I think it would be inappropriate at this point to convey the notion that somehow we've got a final fix on it. But I think it would be fair to say, and General Powell may well want to comment on this, that the initial reaction from the Iraqis is such that I'm generally of the opinion that we achieved a fairly high degree of tactical surprise.
Has there been Israel or Turkey on the part of Iraq?
None to my knowledge.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us, the President mentioned that one of the objectives was to take out chemical and nuclear sites. Can you tell us in a general way if that mission was accomplished?
I can say that we have, in fact, gone after those targets. I do not yet have information on the effectiveness of those efforts.
Mr. Secretary, what about word of casualties at Baghdad? You indicated you wanted to spare civilians there. Do you have any sense about how that may or may not have occurred in the city? There was a lot of bombing, obviously, in Baghdad.
The best reporting that I've seen on what transpired in Baghdad was on CNN. And it would appear, based